Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Let's do this. All right, I'm so excited to bring to you this show today. Gary Van Warmerdam is on the show. He's from pathwaytohappiness.com. He's a coach. He's an author. He helps people to empower their lives, to get power over their thoughts and their beliefs and their emotions, and to eliminate the disease, drama, and suffering that the mind can create in our lives, and to help people find happiness. Really, really good stuff. I'm a huge fan of his work. I think you're really going to like this interview today. Before we get into that, though, I did want to take one quick minute to say thank you to those who contribute to the show through Patreon, my patrons. If you also would like to help out, go to patreon.com/choiceconversations. There's a link to that in the show notes, and you can sign up there, and I would be most grateful. All right, let's get to the show. Gary, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for taking the time.
So just so my audience can be more aware of who it is I'm talking to, could you take a few minutes and maybe tell us about yourself and maybe your journey to how you've gotten to this point where you've got your own podcast, you've written a book, and these online courses and the like?
Wow. Back in like 94, I left my job in the Navy and relationship, and I was unhappy after thinking I should be by then. And I realized I was making bad decisions, and I thought, well, I need to fix what's going on in my head. Some of this might be about me. And I ended up studying with a man named Miguel Ruiz, who then wrote a best-selling book called The Four Agreements and some other best-selling books, and very intensely, which turned out to be over years while I was living my life, doing a lot of weekend workshops and retreats. And then a lot of internal work, a lot of emotional work, a lot of belief system work, very conscious awakening experience, very beautiful heart-opening experiences. And I found out that, wow, there's whole different levels of happiness and joy and emotion and pleasure in life that I didn't know were possible. And I began living that, and then about 15 years ago, I started sharing that and teaching that. And it's grown into a website and a book and online audio programs, and about 1 million visitors a year to my website. And so I've been doing this full time for about 15 years now.
Great.
So and it's a combination of online work and now the book, and I do individual coaching calls with clients, and I do workshops and seminars around the country, and then this year I'll probably be getting to Europe.
Awesome. Fantastic. Now, you mentioned that part of your coming to this point in your life was doing some agreement work.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe talk about what that means? That the agreements, when I first discovered your work and how you described what agreements were, and putting that kind of a framework about what goes on inside of our heads, I found that to be really useful. Mm-hmm. If you could describe that, and we can dive into that further, I think that would be pretty cool.
There's a belief system that operates. It's this operating program we create in our life about how the world works, what we are, what we aren't. Like if I ask you, who are you? You're going to say, I'm Chris, and you say, well, what's Chris about? And there's the way you describe yourself. Those are beliefs you have about yourself. Some of them will be factual, but some of them, when you get down into what's going on emotionally, a lot of times they're often distorted. We can have a lot of agreements, things that we believe, what we hold in our mind as true may not be true. Okay? I'm not good enough is a big one. I'm better than them. They're worse than me. Insecurity is an agreement. Somehow our mental process has compared ourselves to them, or compared an image of ourselves to an image of them. This is often an unconscious, subconscious, or only partially conscious calculation our mind does. And in that comparison, either finds us less than or more than them in some way. And that's an agreement we make that that's true. If we accept it as true, we're like, okay, I'm going to take that conceptual idea, that contract of comparison, and say, hold that as truth. We agree to hold that concept as truth. Well, and I'll call that a belief. And then we walk around with that feeling that that's who we are, or that they are less than or more than them. And it creates a lot of emotional experiences, often unnecessary, often unpleasant, painful, hopelessness, depression, fear, insecurity, anger. And so we end up living unhappily. And a lot of emotional reactions because of these agreements that are underneath the emotion. And what I call beliefs.
Right. Yeah, and you have in your online course some work that you do, some exercises that you recommend for the listeners to do, where they're to like recognize the agreements they have, and first make note of that, and then you can also then work on changing those, right?
Absolutely.
I noticed I can give like an example in my life. I had someone in my life who would often be demonstrating very strong emotions when they would be upset about something, right? Mm-hmm. And this would trigger in me this reaction, and eventually, I would be then having these strong emotions as well. Mm-hmm. And so I listened to your exercise, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit back and think, okay, what is the agreement that I have with myself? And it's, the agreement I have is when this person is upset, I'm going to perceive that as being attacked, and I'm going to get defensive, and I'm going to get angry, and things like that. And I said, once I kind of recognized that, I said, well, what if I can change the agreement to be when this person is exhibiting strong emotion, my agreement is I'm going to be curious and compassionate. I'm going to be compassionate for them because for me, I normally, like the things that they would be riled up about was things that to me seemed just not even worth it. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, yeah. I can't believe that's really got you charged up. The world keeps spinning in my mind, Mm-hmm. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to have compassion for this person, that's where they're at. That's the agreements they have, is that this is really upsetting to them. And right now they're very upset. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to have curiosity and empathy and want to, understand where they're coming from. And just conceptualizing it like that, just saying, okay, this is the agreement I had before, but I'm going to change my agreement and have this new one. I found it's really dramatically changed my reaction to this person. And it was just, all it really took was just kind of thinking about it and saying, you know what, I'm going to choose what agreements I have, and I'm not going to have that old one. I'm going to go with this new one. And now, I've had a couple chances to test this out. Occasionally, those habits run deep, right? The pathways in our brain from how we've acted in the past are, really set in there, and they don't just completely get eradicated with the snapping of your fingers. But I'll find myself wanting to go back to that agreement, and as long as I catch it, I can flip it back and like, oh, that was just that old agreement. No, I've already moved on from that. There's this new one now, and then it is really like flipping a switch where I feel myself just mm-hmm. the muscles of my body relax, mm-hmm. my breathing start to calm down, and the muscles, my face goes from starting to get scrunched up to just relax, and then I'm starting, from there I'm in a place where I can be empathetic and try to help this person out to mm-hmm. Resolve their issue. So
yeah, you're not in a fight or flight, fear, anger mode, and you said it just all it took was just thinking about it. And I want to break that down a little bit more because it was more than just thinking about it. It was what I would start with an awareness, like, hey, I'm reacting this way, and B, do I need an inquiry? I don't need to. What are my other choices? Because a lot of times in a reaction, we don't think about other options. They're reactions. That's
sure.
There's not a choice, and what you have to do is kind of reflect on experiences and say, well, what do I want to do there now? there's a lot of traps that we fall into here, because you were able to make that shift. You then made a commitment. Here's another really important step. It says, hey, I'm going to do it this way. You consciously choose how you want to respond to a situation. That commitment is critical. Okay? So that's more than thinking. That's commitment. Now, you now have to build the neural pathways to do that, and you have to overcome your nervous system response, your emotional response, that's still going to react the original way, that's habit, out of agreement that this means this. Someone's upset and it means this to me. I need to respond this way. You need to, build new neural pathways to build a new response and dissolve the old agreement. So there's a layering at these different levels to build a new pattern. But the critical part here is people don't notice how they react. And they don't know that there's other options. They believe after the reaction, like, well, it was them. No, I did the right thing. I was totally justified. I had to protect myself. I had to stand up for myself. They scare me. So all these justifications, like why we should withdraw or why we should become angry back, there's a lot of justification. Those are agreements too, that you have to say, no, I'm not buying that. I'm not going to buy that justification that, like, I have to curl up and hold my body like this. Okay. So it's not just a singular agreement that you're pulling apart. You're pulling out a system of response that we may have learned when we were 3. I mean, okay. Got smacked on our bottom because we're loud and screaming in a restaurant, and like mom wanted us to calm down. It's like not really terrible, but we're like, oh, don't do that. Okay. So it's more than just an intellectual idea of changing a concept. You're changing, like you said, the neural pathways in the brain, your nervous system, to actually perceive it differently than, say, the way we learn to do is conditioning from 2-3 years old on.
Right. Now, related to this, I'm curious, are you familiar with nonviolent communication called NVC?
Absolutely.
Okay.
By Marshall Rosenberg, his stuff is really great.
Right.
Yeah,
so I'm a big proponent of NVC and have done several shows on it. And what I found interesting, and I like his perspective where he says that you don't deny responsibility, or that so like if somebody says something to you and you should never then say back to them, you made me angry, or she made me so upset, or whatever. That's like denying responsibility for your own feelings and thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting there thinking about this, and you have these emotional responses because you don't have a need getting met. This is like at the very root of nonviolent communication is needs, right? You have these emotions are responses to needs, whether you're having a quote unquote positive emotion, like happiness, gratitude, and the like, whenever needs are being met. And then when needs aren't being met, you have these like, quote unquote negative emotions, like anger, fear, sadness, and so on. But by changing your agreement, it's like the need can go away, because I'm sitting there thinking, in this scenario, what need? Because in the past, I would try to attack these attacks, maybe not a good metaphor for it, but I would try to handle these situations with NVC.
Yeah.
And I find that,
and try and figure out what need you have that's not being met as to causing your reaction, you mean?
Right. And so I'd be like, okay, well, I have a need for peace. I have a need for respect or connection, or these things. Mm-hmm. And it's not happening when this person is really exhibiting the strong emotion and is saying, these certain words to me, like blaming me for this or whatever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But by changing the agreement I have with myself, I'm like, that need isn't even there. All of a sudden it's like that need for peace and respect. Yeah. All of a sudden I'm at that moment, I'm just like wanting, I'm sure there's other needs in play, but it's like those needs that weren't getting met before that were leading to me to get upset. All of a sudden, I guess those needs are filled, or they're just not in play in this scenario.
Right.
I was like, wow, this is really groundbreaking. This is really a big eye opener to me.
Okay. Yeah. This is a different paradigm because taking this, what are my needs, which is a really good system that he provides. But then there's this other, like, what are my needs and are they real needs? Or are these needs that I believe I have? You know, or I have because I believe they're needs, right?
Right.
Okay. I need to be treated with love and respect. I need, you know, love and respect. I don't need that anger. I don't need that. I don't need you guilting me, you know, kind of. So I need to be treated better for my own sense of harmony need, peace need. Well, if you clean up your own belief system, you kind of put yourself in your own consciousness of presence. Because you get rid of these agreements, you release a lot of emotions. A lot of it's repressed emotion, old wounds, belief system, old wounds. And you now live in a state of presence. You live you're satisfied by your own sense of love just moving through you, which is more our natural state. Then somebody can be angry, and if you're really present, you're in that compassionate state. You see that they're angry, but you're in your own emotion. You feel your own emotion of love instead of your own emotion of fear reaction. You feel your own emotion of compassion and respect for them and respect for yourself instead of your anger and your fear. Okay, so it gives you an immunity to the way people treat you because your responses are different now. And you have your own emotional needs met. Whether they treat you kindly or they're trying to guilt you or they're angry, you can kind of go, wow, this looks like you're having a really rough day. You want to talk about it. So your number of choices and responses now is far different. But if you, so I look at this, what are needs and are they really needs like you described? Yeah, what are the agreements to say I need that and if I let go of that layer of emotion, that emotional wound, that repressed emotion that might be being activated and triggered, I can release that. I go, that's not me. That's just something I've been carrying and I can let that go. Yeah, then your range of responses is very different because I think we can say that like Thich Nhat Hanh or the Dalai Lama is going to respond to an insult very differently. Okay?
Sure.
Martin Luther King responded to the mistreatment very differently. The civil rights movement was people saying, I'm not going to take that personally. I'm not going to be offended. I'm not going to be reactive in that way. I'm going to realize it's their hate, and I don't have to believe what they're saying about me. And they had a sense of respect and pride and compassion for people with their hate. And I said, that's your half. And so they didn't need the other party to change so much as they say, I'm not going to change to what you're pushing me towards. So yeah, this is a very different paradigm of looking a layer deeper into oneself.
Right. Yeah, because if you follow NVC and, there's a whole community built up around it, many, classes and workshops and trainers, and there are people that look at NVC as a way of life. Mm-hmm. And, and it's wonderful. It really is. And I have often thought, most of the time when I'm dealing with things and looking at these scenarios that we encounter that, bring strife into our own minds or into our relationships and things like that I'm like, well, NVC is pretty much all you need. If you can really fully integrate it, not just in the words coming out of your mouth, but actually in your thoughts, and you're 100% on NVC, it pretty much gets you there. You solve all this stuff. And at the same time, I've had various degrees of success with NVC, implementing it in my life, and some people I have an easier time than others. Some people are more triggering to me than others. And this whole idea of like, well, what about the belief system? This, like you said, a new paradigm. This belief system can almost like manufacture needs not being met that, doesn't even have to be there. You have control over many of your needs, whether or not they be met or not. Mm-hmm. Just by how you frame your world through your belief system. And that was really, to me, just that that concept that you brought forward, I mean, I just wanted to thank you for it, because it was just kind of mind-blowing to me, and just a whole nother layer of my mental landscape that I just had not even gone into or realized the impact of it. So
yeah, let me lay it out this way. It's because NVC is, I mean, there's so many beautiful, valuable points of the process, and one of them is like, you got to be responsible for your own emotions. These are my needs, and when they're not met, this is what I'm feeling. When they're met, this way. But then we can go a layer deeper and say, what is it about that need? Okay, I need attention from you to feel good. I need this from you to get. We're kind of set up as this emotional response mechanism that maybe we've had for years. And so now what I do is I kind of look at, like, what is that emotional response? What's that mechanism? And can we go a level deeper of, do we have to operate that way? Is there a different way to feel respect, gratitude, love? Is there a different way that I can avoid these triggers? Okay. If someone treats me this way, it's like it's not that they're not satisfying my need, it's they're pushing a button of some neural program of agreement that I respond this way.
Right.
So let's look at that agreement. Let's look at that belief. Let's find that, we want to call it emotional wound, that repressed memory and emotion, and let's unwind that. And then I don't need a person to meet my needs. It's like my emotional needs are already met. I already feel good, whether they do that or not. It's interesting, but these happen so fast, unconsciously, we don't know that they're there. Take, for instance, if you tell a joke and one person hears a joke and laughs, and another person standing right next to him, hearing the same joke, is offended. Was it the joke? No. But how much time elapses between somebody laughing after you tell a joke, you hit the punchline, till someone laughs? It's immediate. Or they're offended immediately. Well,
right.
Something happened in there in one person's mind to create laughter as an emotional response, and something different happened in the other person's mind to be offended. So when somebody does something and you're offended, somebody does something and you have a reaction, would everybody respond that way? Now, in our mind, we would say yes, everybody would, but that's the justification I was talking about earlier. That's the agreement that reinforces the agreement I should be offended. Okay? And so now you have agreements, reinforcing agreements. You have to say, well, wait a minute. Is that the only possible response? No. Thich Nhat Hanh and Dalai Lama probably wouldn't be offended. So what's going on with me? That's the agreement. Yeah, this is a deeper level of work. It takes more scrutiny, but you really change how you feel permanently. You no longer have to manage your relationships externally in the same way.
Right. Yeah, and I liked how in your lesson, the Abdication of Power, you talked about how you're giving power to these agreements, right? And you're, rather than choosing to keep keep that power for yourself, or put it in the agreements that you choose. And because when I discovered NVC, and one of the don'ts in NVC is don't deny responsibility for your feelings and your thoughts, right? You made me think this, you made me feel that. That's not NVC. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, I was giving my power away to these other people when I allowed them to make me angry. Now I'm not giving that power up. I'm keeping it for myself. And you talked about that, not in regards to NVC, but just in general, people talking about scenarios like that. And you said, actually, you never did give the other person your power. What you did is you gave the agreement the power. You can't give another person power to make you have any emotion at all. All you could do is give an agreement power, and then that person can just trigger the agreement. And I was like, that is pretty profound. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but now that you say it, now that I see it in action, as I recognize my own agreements and work to change them, I really can see it now. That really is what you're doing. Is the power is in the agreement, and so once you have that awareness, you can then choose what agreements you're going to give your power to.
Where your personal power is now determine how you feel. And let me give an example. It's like, okay, if they do that one more time, I'm going to get so mad. It's like, it sounds like, well, if they do that, they're going to make me mad. If they do that, they're going to make me so mad. It's like we're hypnotizing ourselves to say, I'm going to react this way if they do that. And it's self-hypnosis, and it's repetition. Now, it's also reinforced. Maybe we've got old patterns of repressed emotion that reacts a certain way. So the agreement then reinforces the emotional response, and now you've got a real, seamless system. So you have to unwind, the agreement first and go, okay, I said I wouldn't react that way, but son of a gun, part of me still did. And now we have to go a level deeper and say, well, what part reacted that way? It wasn't me. All of this hinges on kind of a couple principles. One is you're not your thoughts. You're not even necessarily like the mind. You're not the mind. And a lot of what the mind thinks is not you thinking it. Okay, the mind is just generating these ideas all day. That's what it does. And pictures and scenarios and images, our life, and how this is going to go, or the date's going to go, or the interview's going to go, and what might happen and how terrible it'll be, the presentation we got to give, and we play that in our mind. And replaying the past, it's creating stuff out of nothing all day. So you're not that thing that's generating all that. It's doing it by itself. And the shift here, and you're not the emotions. People hypnotize themselves like, oh, I'm so angry, I'm so sad, I'm depressed. Like, no, you're not an emotion. You have them, you feel them, but even saying I'm so angry puts your consciousness into this sense that you're the emotion. And if you're the emotion, you have no choice but to be that emotion. You don't get the choice, I'm going to change that emotion, I'm going to not believe the thought. No, you are the thought, you are the emotion, and you're kind of hypnotized into those little bubbles of ideas and emotion. And so a critical part of this process is to step back as the neutral observer, which you'll hear in a lot of different work, and you have to take this 10,000-foot view or mindful observer point of view to say, oh, that's what my mind's doing. Oh, this is what my emotions are doing. Those are my emotions. I feel them, but they're not what I am. Those are my thoughts, and there's a part of my mind thinking those thoughts, but it's not me that's thinking that. Okay, so when you start developing, and what I'll call your now consciousness, you have this sense of awareness watching the mind, observing. And I call it consciousness watching the mind instead of the mind watching the mind. Because if you're in the state of the mind watching the mind, it's like, oh, there's that thought again. I shouldn't be thinking that. I thought I was over that. Thought I let that go. That's how the mind talks about what the mind does. It's kind of judgment and victimization about what's going on in there. And so consciousness then, to really pull back from all the different stories and emotions, consciousness can sit and be still. It might be still with the storm around you if you sit down to meditate. You're working to create a kind of peaceful state of presence to then watch the mind and all the emotions go crazy. Because when you sit down to meditate, that's often what they do. They get really loud. They complain about being uncomfortable. It's not working. It's like, if you believe that and say, oh yeah, this isn't working, now you're in the mind. You're in the agreement. And it's hypnotized you to agree and say, oh, it's not working. You stop meditating. But as the observer, you go, oh, that's the mind saying that. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's trying to get me to agree with it. And so this mind does this hypnotic thing of trying to get you to agree and reinforce the ideas that are there. And this is the critical break where people go, wow, talking to a client who was on my recent trip to Mexico, he said he was doing one of my exercises and he was doing it for about 30 days. It was the way I prescribe a journal writing. And he said, and after 30 days, the whole thing flipped for him. It wasn't maybe 20 minutes a day or something, but the whole thing flipped there. And he began to see, it's like, wow, this is the mind. Now I see it. And he can hold it. And he's like, that thing's out of control. Which is something you don't notice. But then he could make changes. It was easy for him to not agree and not keep reinvesting his personal power in these thoughts and agreements. And that's critical. Until you have that experience and you see what's going on in your mind that way, what you and I are describing or sounds like gibberish. Because people go, well, then I am the one thinking in here. No, I think that way. I agree with that. They're rigidly aligned with and identify with their emotions and thoughts, and so there's no other options. So the kind of perception I'm talking about sounds a little bit scary and not possible, and that I'm out there. But that's you have to make that separation. You have to take a point of view of consciousness, of stillness, and watch. And stillness doesn't mean your mind is calm. Stillness means that you can just sit there. I'm going to sit there. I'm going to watch this show, and then you get an idea of not just that the mind generates stuff by itself and it isn't telling you the truth all the time, but you also get a big important shift is you get a sense that you're something else. You're this sense of consciousness that's in the midst of that mind. That your point of view is not in those stories or not in the voice of those thoughts.
Yeah, it's really important to be aware of the thoughts we hold and the beliefs we have, because they do shape our reality. Like you had said, if you believe you're angry, then you're angry and your options are cut off at that point, right?
Yeah.
And I've made this quote many times on the show, but I love that Henry Ford says, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, either way you're right. Because the power of your thoughts really, it dictates your reality. I'm a big fan of affirmations and the like, and just helping to get the thought first. The thought leads to actions, which leads to outcomes. And if you don't have the thought first, you're not going to have the outcomes you want. And, just having that awareness is, so key. And you had talked about, being the observer. And I know that's something that you bring up repeatedly. And maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that, the observer, and contrast that to some of the other like archetypes, like, the hero or the villain or, the judge and the victim, that sort of thing.
How about I go a little deeper on something you just mentioned about the thoughts and how important it is.
Sure, absolutely.
Because I want to make a distinction between what's a thought and a belief. A thought, there's lots of thoughts we can have, and oftentimes we might not believe them.
Right.
And so what turns a thought into a belief? A belief is something we feel we know, something we say is fact. I'm so angry. Now, we might feel a lot of emotion, but saying, and this is where kind of the language becomes critical. So I'm so angry doesn't sound like much. It's like, well, we're just describing how we feel. Like, yeah, but you're hypnotizing your mind and yourself to be really identified with the anger. And so you take a different point of view when you believe what you say. And we kind of take our perception of our consciousness into that anger of emotion, which now everything is perceived through that lens of anger. But faith is this investment, this conviction in a thought that turns it into a belief. It's a personal power. And I'm not talking about religious faith. I'm just talking about this power to believe something, this conviction. Absolute certainty. Oh, you did that because I know you did that because you didn't, trying to hurt me. That's said with faith, blame, anger, judgment, criticism. That makes our words powerful, makes the thought powerful. Thoughts by themselves, not really that powerful. Because we can say, Chris, I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. It's not that believable. But if I say it with conviction, Chris, I'm an idiot. I'm so stupid. This has an energetic structure to it that feeds our mind and makes it a powerful emotional experience. Because we can use the same thought and make it as a joke. And it's funny, we can use it as sarcasm. It means the exact opposite. You say, oh, I'm an idiot. Yeah, I'm an idiot. You know, it's like we can change the inflection, conviction, tone, emotion. We can make it mean the opposite. Oh, yeah, you got that one right. Oh, you're so bright. You're a genius. Okay? Saying the opposite. The thought is the same, but I can make it mean the opposite. I can say it as if I'm critical of someone being stupid, but the thought is you're a genius. So, wow, what is the energy, emotion, tone, inflection, conviction? What is that message? Not the words, but the energy of emotion, tone, attitude that we put in there. Because this is the meaning. This is how we create emotion. This is how we create feeling. This is where the agreement is. Okay? And that's what makes thoughts powerful. There was a gentleman, and he was telling a story of affirmations, and he get in front of the mirror every morning. He was saying this affirmation, and he say, I'm a man, and a man is a beautiful thing to be, or something like that. And he felt like such a fraud saying it for months and months.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Okay? But how you feel when you say it. Now, he wasn't able to get himself to feel like it was a beautiful thing. But if you feel it's a beautiful thing, then you say it differently. Okay? So that conviction, that feeling to me is more important than just the words. What's the meaning?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, when I'm recommending affirmations to people, you know, when I talk about it, I always say that they're worthless. They don't provide any value if you don't actually believe what it is you're saying. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to actually believe it. And I said that if you don't, I mean, there are some kind of tricks you can do that can be helpful. Like, rather than saying, you know, I am happy, you could say, I'm becoming a happier person. I am working towards being a happier person, or something like that. And that could be a lot easier for people to believe. They could say, yeah, you know what, that I could see. I am working on it and moving in the right direction. And they can actually believe that and say it. Or the other thing that I've heard that people can do is pretend. Be like, well, okay, you know you're not healthy, but just pretend you're healthy and say, when you're doing these affirmations, you know, I am young and healthy and full of vitality. Mm-hmm. Pretend you are, and just feel like, what would it be like to actually be a person that was young, healthy, and full of vitality? And when you're doing the affirmations, pretend it. You know, it's like fake it till you make it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have had success with that. But if you're just sitting there saying the words and being like, meanwhile, the thoughts accompanying it are, this is complete bullshit. It's just, that's not going to work. That's your waste of your time.
Yeah. Let me, since we're playing with this, it's an interesting thing to note when people work with affirmations. Also, be aware that, like, even if you say it with conviction, you say it, I'm becoming a happier person. You know, and you've got evidence of, you know, things you've been doing over months, and you can kind of look at that and you're just like, that's true, right? You can still have other beliefs in your mind that push back against that belief.
Sure.
They're like competing for space on the grocery shelf.
Right. That's where I'd like to get into the whole, like, observer versus the other
Yeah. So when you do something and like, or you make forwards or just making any changes in your life, there's often kind of a pushback and say, no, you're not. That another voice can come in, another contradictory belief, because we can have multiple beliefs that contradict. Or another one comes and says, no, you're not. And you don't even deserve to be happy. Or you're going to screw this up. Oh, this is only fleeting and you're going to go back to the way you were. This won't last. So you get this rebuttal from your own mind. This is a belief system that exists kind of as its own separate energy, trying to rebut this new way of being. So when you're making progress, expect this to happen. Okay? Expect there's going to be resistance, there's rebuttals, sabotage to your own thought process. You're going to come up against beliefs that push back verbally in your head or try and skew your behavior to sabotage that, because I think of it as they're all alive. They're in there. We've been keep feeding them our faith and our emotions. Have kind of been living on that energy. And if we really become a happy person, all those dreams, those beliefs, those energies, they're going to die. And they're fighting for their survival. So they push back. They don't want us to, really adopt this whole new identity and way of living. So I think it's really important to have a good lay of the land and go, okay. And when they show up and they push back, you go, oh, God, what is that? And that's still there. You go, no, that just kind of shows up like, I must be making progress or else they wouldn't be threatened. Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
You can make a different interpretation. It doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean it's like, you can kind of look at that resistance and go, oh, they're resisting, so I must be making progress. You can take that interpretation and be much more accepting that, yeah, it's there and this is your work to do. This is the agreement that says, well, what is that agreement now that says I'm not and this goes into the belief system work that I get into in my book and my online course. Like, what is that agreement there that says I'm not deserving or that I'll fall back and fail? What is that? What's the rest of that conversation? And what I invite people to do is go, hey, voice, what else do you have to say about that? This is interesting. Not interesting because I want to believe it. Not interesting because I want to fight against it. Interesting because I'm like, let's let you unload out onto this page. Let's write out all the stuff you have to say. Because that voice wants to be heard. And when you pour it out onto the page and you read it, you've expanded your awareness. You've expanded your consciousness. You've opened up with a compassion to yourself and your own resistance. You're engaging in your own mind in a way that's healing because your consciousness is going into that dark shadow area of a story and pulling it out. And that gives it a chance to empty out and clean. And you get a chance to see the other agreements it has that it's holding. Okay, maybe from the time we were in third grade and our teacher scolded us, we felt like, oh, I'm a terrible person. If I'm a terrible person, I don't deserve to be happy. It's like we can have one experience like that story originated from, like, oh my God, that part of the mind has been holding that memory and that sense of guilt and that sense of shame. Oh my God, that all needs to come out. We need to let that go. And this is a real healing process, and this is how you clean out your mind, by being honest about what's there.
So I'm curious if you're familiar with interfamily systems therapy.
Is that where they do a lot of role playing?
So interfamily systems therapy, it's or IFS, it is a style of psychotherapy where the goal is to meet and know these different voices inside of you that often fall under like these archetypes,
mm-hmm.
The victim, the judge,
mm-hmm.
there's the angry child, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are several of them that are common that are shared by many people. And you get to know them and heal them
mm-hmm.
and help them to live in harmony inside of you. And you refer to like the observer, the one that sits back and watches and is more grounded, and doesn't get caught up in the stories of the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
That they would call that in IFS, they would call that your true self. There's your true self, and then there are sub-selves.
Mm-hmm.
And what the goal of IFS is to kind of, basically it's to put the true self at the wheel so that your true self is guiding your life rather than these sub-selves which keep trying to grab the wheel. Mm-hmm. And you want the true self at the wheel and the true self to work with the sub-selves to get them all to live in harmony with one another. And a lot of it's around changing these it doesn't use, I've never heard it use these exact terms that you put it in of like changing the agreements, right? But it's essentially what you're doing is you're working with them to say, I know that this makes you angry, or when this happens, you get angry. Mm-hmm. But maybe there's another way that you could respond to that. Or maybe you're getting angry because this need isn't getting met. But there are many ways that we can get that need met. Let's look and see if we can find some different strategies. Rather than you grabbing the wheel, and then the response then is when you grab the wheel, I end up yelling at my wife and kicking my dog. Or when you grab the wheel, I go out drinking or binge eating or whatever. Instead of this, there's other strategies that you could use to meet that. And can we work together? And can you trust me? Like build a trusting relationship with the true self, or as you would call it, like the observer, to allow me to stay at the wheel and find ways that we can all get our needs met and live in harmony together. So that's kind of the in a nutshell what IFS is. Mm-hmm. And when I was listening to your work, I'm like, this is just like screaming of IFS. Mm-hmm. It sounds a lot of it sounds very much like it, and a different angle of attacking the same issues that are occurring in all of our brains, right?
Right.
So I mean, there's more than one way to solve the problem of how to obtain peace and happiness, mm-hmm. and to get all of our needs met, right? And but there was definitely a lot of overlap, and especially the way of conceptualizing what our inner world looks like is it was conceptualized very similarly in IFS as to how you presented it with the observer and the various archetypes.
Mm-hmm. I think if you when someone looks at my process on my course, my book, they particularly more in the course, because the course online and the self-mastery course on my site goes in more depth with different practices. Mm-hmm. And the book is more of a textbook. There's a lot of good practices in there, but an overview covers some things more in depth. But the course, I think you get this breadth of exercises and depth of exercises and practices. You'll find I think a lot of people could look at that and say, oh, this is like Buddhism. Oh, this is like this mindfulness practice. Oh, this is like cognitive behavioral therapy. Oh, this is like, narrative therapy. Oh, this is like
IFS.
IFS. You're going to see a lot of other systems that it's like in various ways because, yeah, like you said, it cuts to what I find is the core of what's going on that's creating drama in people and dis-ease and unhappiness. Okay, the suffering, the misery. What are the core beliefs? What are the emotions? How do you step back and become the observer and dismantle this? And my approach is you take a big problem and you break it down into a bunch of smaller problems. My background's engineering. This is how I solved engineering problems, right? Like, okay, all of these things are a bunch of little problems put together. When you look at, say, if you're doing jealousy or you've got you discover your partner in a relationship has cheated on you, you've got 16 different emotions going on. You have multiple stories, and your mind's so busy, hard to get through your day. That's too much to say, what do I do to solve it, to expect one answer. When you try and do it that way, you don't have an answer, and so you feel like a failure, I don't know what to do, because you're trying to solve it all at once. Like, no. So you break it down into smaller parts. Talking to a woman in tough time in her marriage, and she's like, what should I go do? And I'm like, well, what are your options? She's trying to answer, well, do I stay with him and do I leave, or, and do I work it out? And does he, what if he doesn't want to work it out? What if he does work it out, but he only goes so far? It's like, how do I get all this done? I'm like, you get it done one step at a time. You can't answer right now, should you leave or should you stay? You can't answer that question today. You gotta go have a conversation with him. Okay? For you to stay, you're going to have to figure out what would you need, what do you want in your life? You say, yeah, I'm willing to work this out. And staying is not an option, but working it out is. What are the steps to work it out so you do stay? So you can't commit to staying and then try and work it out. It's like, you need to work some things out to decide if you're going to stay. Okay. So our mind often asks the wrong question. It asks a question that puts us in a bind. Should I stay? And leaving, there's all sorts of guilt in leaving and throwing away in the investment. It's like, no, you can't answer that question. Like, what do you need to go? You're going to have guilt about leaving. What do you need to resolve with yourself so you don't judge yourself and feel guilty and feel like you failed and feel like you gave up? And it's like, what do you need to address that story first so that you can go and feel good? Like, yeah, this is the right decision to me. So, let's address that story so that you feel free to leave. Because trying to say, well, should I leave? She imagines leaving, and then immediately the story kicks in. I'll feel guilty. I let him down. All these promises, and I'm a bad person. It's like, well, now leaving, which might be the right choice, feels like the wrong choice because all the agreements. So, yeah, this process is about breaking these bigger issues down to smaller issues. And the way I do that is you have to look at the whole list of emotions. You say, wow, I'm going through 16 different emotions that cycle during the day because of this going on. It's anger and sadness, it's grief, it's guilt, it's shame, it's resentment. Okay. It's what are the agreements connected to each of those emotions? And then as the observer, it's, if I leave, I'm a bad person because I promised to do this. I'm not doing what I said I would. Doesn't fit this image of perfection of me, how I'm supposed to be. It's like, wow, okay, how I'm supposed to be, how I'm being judged. I'm a failure. Feel guilty for not being the perfect image I have in my mind what I'm supposed to be. Like, this is a lot of moving parts. And then you have to be the observer of all this. And when big chaos and crisis is going on, you're not going to be the observer day one. You have to sort through some of these and be an observer of one of these agreements at a time until you can step back from all of it. And so this is the other part of being the observer. It's like, well, so what part of me is doing this? What subpersonality? What persona? To say, if I'm the true self, okay, then the part that feels victimized and afraid, that's not me. That's just something I do as an emotion once in a while. And I take that attitude. Oh, and when I feel that fear, I withdraw. Okay, so I have that behavior, that habit, that's kind of a neural response. And we say, that's a part of my behavior, but it's not me. And so this is where I teach people to let's disidentify with some of these things that aren't us. Because our mind messes it up and says it's I and me about everything we do. When in fact, sometimes it's our mind. And this is where I teach people to take this inventory and break it down to smaller pieces. So what are the parts of your mind that do different things? What's the part of your mind that's critical? What's your part of your mind that's afraid? What's part of your mind that's angry and resentful? And what's the part of your mind that withdraws and wants to hide in solitude and isolate? And so we have these different modalities of emotional strategies and control strategies that we've developed, and we say we're not those. These are strategies we developed. In order not to get criticized, we've tried to be perfect. In order to get attention and approval and love, we've tried to be perfect. So we have this perfectionist. I'm not, and we have to say, instead of say, oh, I'm such a perfectionist, we say, no, I'm not a perfectionist. I've learned that as a strategy. I've learned that as a strategy in my patterning to get approval, to get love, get attention, and avoid criticism. But that is not what I am. And so it's this uncomfortable disidentifying with these modalities of living and say, that's not what I am. And when you do that, you become the observer and you start laying out an inventory of these kind of sub-personalities. There's the perfectionist. There's the judge that's critical of myself. It's critical of other people. There's the victim that wants to withdraw or blames other people because it's hurt, but gets a lot of attention. It's really good at getting attention and goes and calls with friends and they drink together or they tell stories together and they get lots of support. Boy, it's a big attention getter. I get a lot of mileage out of playing that role. And I love being that role, or I feel like I'm loved. But it's not me that's loved. It's just me it's not even a me. You know what? Let's change the language. And so the I and me statements have to change for us to become the observer. And then what do you call these things that aren't you but are part of your behaviors? I call them characters or archetype characters of our behavior and our strategies. And this is how you can systematically move to the observer, not in one big step, but you've broken it up into smaller steps, smaller problems, step by step. And that makes it easier to get there and say, well, how do I be the observer? I sit and meditate and it's all just a storm. It's like, no, you can do this kind of writing and breakdown of this inventory and look at these stories in your head and remove your identity from them one at a time.
Excellent. Well, we've ran out of time, and I still have like half of the things that I wanted to talk to you about in here. So if it would be possible, sometime in the future, I would love to have you back on to dive in further into more of these thoughts and areas that you cover.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that would be really great. Yeah, fantastic.
Thanks for letting me drop a level deeper and, painting a picture with these other layers.
Oh, it's absolutely been my pleasure, and this has been very helpful to me. I'm sure it'll be very helpful to many of my listeners. If my audience would like to get some more from you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
My website is pathwaytohappiness.com. If they want to kick the tires and find out how I think about and view things, the free audio podcast, also available on iTunes. Happiness through self-awareness, podcast awareness. What do I call my podcast? Awareness and Conscious Podcast. Happiness through self-awareness. That's what I call it.
Yeah, it took me a while to find it because, I was looking for the Pathway to Happiness podcast, and that was not coming up. So I eventually found it.
So the website is pathwaytohappiness.com, and podcast is on iTunes. Look up Gary Van Warmerdam or just look up awareness. You'll find me. And then kick the tires, look at the iTunes podcast. And then if you want to actually, what are the steps to changing these agreements, identifying and changing it and becoming the observer in a very systematic way, then it's the self-mastery course. And it's very step-by-step. It's what I would teach my coaching clients over weeks. I just made instead of teaching them the same thing, because I've just developed this system that was very effective of these exercises. Instead of repeating it over the phone, I made recordings, and people can do it at their own pace. And they can do the first 4 sessions free, just find out if it works for them. And there's also my book available online. It's called MindWorks, Practical Guide to Change Thoughts, Beliefs, and Emotional Reactions. So which gives a really good overview and some of the exercises from the course from there. So that's the best way to go at it.
Great. And I'll be sure to put links to all of this in the show notes to make it easy for my listeners. They can just open the show notes and click on it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much, Gary.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, man. What a great privilege it was to get to speak with him, with Gary, and share his wisdom. I look forward to talking to him again. Just so full of wisdom and excellent guidance. So check out his work at pathwaytohappiness.com. You can buy his book, MindWorks, on Amazon. I'll get a link to that in the show notes. Go ahead, click on that. Or go sign up for a course or some coaching with him on his website. I'm sure that would be money very well spent. He is a master. If you enjoyed this show and you'd like to help out, The best thing for you to do is to go to patreon.com/choiceconversations and sign up there to be a patron. There is a link in the show notes, so if you would do that, I would be most grateful. And oh yes, don't forget, make the choice to be great.